What happened in Kentucky on Tuesday? What a crazy election night. A big night for the Republicans and a night that the Democratic Party in Kentucky will not soon forget. Republican newcomer Matt Bevin knocks off Jack Conway to claim the governorship. And not only that, the down-ballot races mostly went the Republicans' way also, even claiming Democratic Auditor Adam Edlin's job in the process. I'm Michael Monks inside the River City News podcast studio, and today I am joined by Northern Kentucky University political science professor Dr. Ryan Salzman, also a Bellevue city councilman. Ryan, thanks for coming down.
Thanks for having me.
What a crazy night in Kentucky.
It was a relatively short night, but it made for an early morning.
No kidding. What happened?
Well, I think that what we saw last night was emblematic of what's been going on in Kentucky for a while now, for potentially a couple decades, and also just generally around the South. I know that as we sit up here in Northern Kentucky, we forget maybe sometimes that we're in the South, but the patterns here are being felt in Arkansas and Louisiana, and were felt in places like Texas some 20 years ago.
You know, all the polling showed a Conway victory by 4 or 5 points, and he lost by 8. What does that say about the current state of polling?
Well, I think if you go back to the Senate race last year, we saw the same thing. We saw Allison Lonergan Grimes hanging in there with Senator McConnell until the end, and then she ended up losing by a couple 100,000 votes. There's something systematically wrong in the polling, and I say systematic because it's breaking the same direction. And sometimes in polling, actually always in polling, there's going to be uncertainty, but you hope that some polls break closer, others break farther apart. But the fact that at least over the last 2 election cycles, we've seen them break 5 to 10 points in the Republican direction means there's something going on with their sampling. There's always going to be a question about sampling error when you have small numbers being polled. We don't talk enough about the fact that a 5 percentage point gap may not actually be a gap, statistically speaking, depending on the number that you're surveying. But that being said, when you're seeing a swing of 10 points, that really shouldn't happen if you're doing polls correctly.
You know, I think if you talk to people leading up to this race, many people would have considered the possibility that Matt Bevin would defeat Jack Conway. However, I'm not sure that there was such confidence in a Republican sweep or a near sweep, particularly in the race for state auditor. And this is where Democrat Adam Edlin, who had done a pretty decent job by most accounts in his office, he was easily defeated by State Representative Mike Harmon. So what does that say about the Democratic brand in Kentucky?
No one's safe. And that's the long and the short of it, is no one's safe if you're a Democrat in the Commonwealth. And I think you're right that most people were very high on the auditor and talking about him, in fact, as being the likely challenger for Rand Paul next spring. That's probably off the plate. And so I don't know who you're going to get even to try to pick up that flag and run with it. If you were out there considering a run for office right now, would you want a D next to your name? I know that I wouldn't.
So this morning, the morning after the election, what type of meeting is happening at the Democratic headquarters?
That's a great question. I hope for their sake that they're not meeting. I probably what they need to do is do a little soul searching. We talked about this a lot after the Republicans lost the last presidential election. And you have to do that. Sometimes when you gather together, you find solace, you reassure yourselves that it's not that bad. But they need to go out and they need to look at these numbers on their own and have some alone time, as I would say to my toddler, and take some deep breaths and try to appreciate how bad it is. They would do well to try to meet with some experts, whether it's in the Commonwealth, at universities that can give them a very blunt analysis and then help them move forward. But eventually they're going to have to move forward. I don't think this is that time. If it were me, if I were running the Democratic Party right now, I'd say, I'll see y'all on January 1. Let's take a little time. Let's enjoy our families. Let's be with the ones we love. But this is not the time to try to strategize moving forward, because I don't think that they would appreciate what just happened.
But that's not the message that was given from the stage last night, and I thought this was very interesting. Both Allison Grimes in her victory speech talked about rebuilding the Democratic Party starting the next day. House Speaker Greg Stumbo was clearly in charge of giving some type of pep rally-esque speech to the crowd afterwards, and he did his best. Now, what he said was, in essence, we need to quote the Bible more. We need to let the people of Kentucky know that the Republicans don't own Christianity. You heard another Democratic state senator come on KET after the election and say we didn't criticize Obama enough. So the early plans for rebuilding the Democratic Party appears to me to be more Republican.
And that would probably be, I guess, a place to start. That, again, it's low-hanging fruit. I don't know that anybody questioned things like, their devotion to Christ in the process. When you lose by 8 points, I mean, if you lose by a smaller margin, I could see that going after that low-hanging fruit might have gotten you the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 votes that you needed. But when you're trying to cover an 80,000 vote gap, you're actually needing, I don't want to say to do the opposite. That is, I don't want to say you want to divorce yourself from the Bible and divorce yourself from all of those principles that are so important to so many Kentuckians. But you need some way to differentiate yourself, and you need a way to get people excited. This has been consistent for Democrats around the country for the last decade or so, that when we look at enthusiasm levels, they're always much lower. There's a huge enthusiasm gap playing out there. I also think that they need to find the right candidates, and that's I don't want to say that to disparage the people who lost last night. They were excellent candidates, and many of them were incumbents. And like I said, Adam Edelin. But the future of the Democratic Party is based on people. And so they're going to have to go out and find people maybe that are well established in their own communities that can carry their communities without much doubt. So they're already coming to the table with an 80-20 victory in a place like Owensboro. And bring that with that in their back pocket. They're good people. They're motivators, and they help bring some enthusiasm back to the party.
Well, it looks like the Democrats had a plan for the future 4 years ago in 2011. They had a pretty good-looking bench. That was a year in which Jack Conway was elected Attorney General, Grimes was elected Secretary of State, Edelin was elected Auditor, and here they are 4 years later, completely decimated. Conway's done. I mean, that could be the end of his political career, at least for the next decade. And I don't know how Adam Edelin rebounds anytime soon after losing that office. So not only did the Republicans claim all of the power in Frankfort, they decimated the Democratic bench. I mean, the Democrats are going to be starting at ground zero in their rebuild efforts across the state. Now, we referenced the headquarters a little earlier, and Matt Bevin famously made 2 trips to Democratic Party headquarters during the course of the campaign, and was concerned about a billboard outside of the headquarters. And a lot of people pointed to his temperament because of this, and the way that he treated reporters on the campaign trail, and some of the notable hypocritical statements or contradictory statements that he was making on the campaign trail. And ultimately, none of this seemed to matter. He still came away with a victory. Was it Matt Bevin who won this race, or was it simply being a Republican in the age of Obama in Kentucky?
I would go with the latter. I'm trying to imagine somebody it was a 3-way race back in May or April. Was there one of those people who would have lost this race? I don't think so. I think that any of those 3 candidates would have likely won, Comer or Heiner or Bevin, and they were very different candidates. In fact, I think if anything, you would have seen somebody like a Comer probably up on Conway going into it, and just go ahead and add that 13-point swing from the polls to the end result again, and it's an even wider victory. So there's no doubt that in the Commonwealth, like again in a lot of other southern states, the real races are the primary races moving forward.
No question about it. I mean, that was a very competitive primary race, and I think a lot of people thought that James Comer was going to win that nomination and then probably easily beat Jack Conway in the fall. However, when Matt Bevin pulled off this shocking win the first time earlier this year, I think the Democrats saw that they had a chance, and that proved to be untrue. So here we are in a state that had 11% unemployment in 2008. It's now been cut mostly in half. And there's a state that was one of the highest uninsured. Now almost everyone has health insurance. Those were policies pushed forward by a Democratic governor and a Democratic president. How does this happen?
Well,
how do they not own the message?
Yeah, that's the thing, and this kind of, I think, goes back to that idea of sort of an enthusiasm gap, or I think that there was a lot of kind of schadenfreude on the side of the Democrats when Bevin won. A lot of, we got him now. Look at Comer. Spending too much time reveling in the supposed, internal divisions and self-destruction happening within the Republican base. And like you said, not taking the things that were going well and running with them. That being said, I've been in places, large meetings where Governor Beshear has given speeches, and they are touting those things, but it's back to the idea that those can also be linked very quickly to President Obama.
And all you have to say is Obama.
Yeah, all you have to say is
All you have to say is Obama. You know, there was a Beshear on the ballot, Andy Beshear, and he squeaked out a victory for the Attorney General's race against State Senator Whitney Westerfield. And Westerfield's camp, or maybe a super PAC supporting him, had sent out a mailer that just called him Andy Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the complete political strategy for these folks. It's just to tie the guys to a president who is unpopular in this state, in spite of the improving economy and in spite of the improving healthcare situation in the state.
But I think, to be fair, those are also things that they're able to do on top of the demographic change that's occurring here, or at least partisan change that had already been occurring. If Kentucky had not been going increasingly Republican, then those kinds of strategies would not have been as effective. But what they were trying to do is kind of solidify this wave that's already occurring, already happening, and so that, just holler Obama as loud and as often as you can was something that was useful because the tide was moving their direction. If the tide was moving away from them, it would not have done anything for them, or likely done a lot less for them. So, we just can't forget that Kentucky has been moving this way for a long time, and I think Democrats should be particularly worried, because I think if Conway had won, which clearly he was a long way from actually doing that, if he had won, then they might have been able to try to put up enough sandbags to keep the tide out long enough for things to change nationally and even things to change more locally. I think that this election says that Republicans will control the Commonwealth fully for probably the next 30 or 40 years. That's just a guess. But I think that you're not going to see Republicans backing off. Their eyes are squarely set on the House and the General Assembly, and this enthusiasm, this momentum will only continue. And any concerns that Democrats or others may have about the Bevin administration, even if there were problems, and I'm not saying that there are going to be problems, but they will not bear out in time to affect that House race. That House race is not going to be impacted at all by these statewide races, except to say that they have a ton of momentum going.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats have a very little window of time to regroup and get back on the battlefield because, like you said, the battle for the House begins immediately. And 2016 is a big year because the legislature is up for grabs. And Senator Paul's seat is on the ballot next year also. And I think we referenced that Adam Edelman was whispered as a potential challenger to him. I think his chances have depleted. But I'm sure the Democrats are going to want to make that race competitive in some manner. You'll have all the congressional seats up. It's going to be a very quick turnaround for a team that lost nearly all of its players.
And we can't forget the election last year with Allison Grimes being defeated so soundly by Senator McConnell. Also the congressional races, those being very, very wide. District 4 here in Northern Kentucky was a laugher of a race. In fact, I hesitate to even call it a race. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a Democrat right now, where's your motivation? You've been told 2 years running that you're in this, that you're going to do it, and you've just gotten whooped. It's hard to show up. I mean, we see this on the football field and the baseball field all the time, right? That you can only withstand so many beatings before one game you just don't show up. Yeah. But Democrats need to be worried that 2016, if they don't show up, that it can get worse for them. Now, I don't want to say worse as in us here in Northern Kentucky or in the Commonwealth in general should be worried about anything about our livelihoods, but this is just talking about the parties themselves.
And it's all going to be in the context of a presidential race that will be taking place throughout the spring and then in the fall as well. So I'm sure that the candidates on either party's side, whoever they may end up being, will play a pretty hefty role in the message down ballot as well.
I'm sure of that.
All right. Ryan Salzman, political science professor at Northern Kentucky University, member of the Bellevue City Council. Thanks for coming down and analyzing this with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm Michael Monks. You've been listening to the River City News Podcast. Follow us online at RCNKY.